Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The topic for tonight is, what do we do when we are faced with pain? Usually, most of us, what we've learned, and often it starts in our childhood, when we are not strong enough to protect ourselves, when we are not strong enough to handle strong emotions or high dosage of pain, what we learned to do in order to protect ourselves was to find ways to avoid feeling that pain and distract ourselves from it, right? And at that point, this was the best thing we could do, right? Imagine we're much younger, we were a child, we did not have the capacity to deal with that much pain. And of course, some people have had more difficult childhood, but even if you think about a normal childhood, the capacity of a child is obviously not comparable to an adult. So sometimes even experiences that now we may look back and consider them not that difficult, but still they can have impacts on us. So we could not handle a pain or a strong emotion. And slowly, what we learned to do was that if we're faced with pain, we have to avoid it and distract ourselves from that pain. And as a result of doing this for a while, we have learned, or we have adopted certain addictions. Okay? Now, this is very good for us because this will help us understand what is the root of some of the problems we have. Okay? Now, for example, one of the things that we do in order to avoid pain and distract ourselves, because we can put them into 4 categories, right? The first category, the first side effects of not dealing with pain, but rather distracting yourself from it, avoiding it, the first side effects, the first category is addiction to certain manipulating behaviors. Okay, now this could be anger, this could be blaming, this could be judging, this could be interrogating, this could be withdrawal. Now you may be thinking, how is, for example, blaming relevant to distracting yourself from pain? Okay, let me try to open this up. Imagine something happened, a conflict, or something terrible happens to you. It's really upset, right? Something that you did not expect to happen happens, and it makes you feel terrible. Okay? Now, instead of dealing with this, sitting with it, why do I feel terrible? Why am I so much affected by what happened, right? But that is very difficult. That's very uncomfortable. So what can we do? We're like, okay, instead of dealing with this, let me distract myself and do something else. Now, one of the things we can do is blaming others. Because if I am busy finding the person responsible for my feeling, then I don't need to deal with it. So my energy would go there, right? So you can see, as soon as something happens, if a person has learned this pattern of blaming, the first thing is like, who did this, right? Imagine it could be sometimes as simple as you're walking and then maybe there's a glass of water or something on the floor. Your foot touches the glass. It may hurt your foot. It hurts you. And instead of saying, ouch, it hurts, or dealing with that pain, like, who put this glass here? Right? So the first thing we do immediately is trying to find someone responsible for this. Why? Because we have learned, as soon as pain comes, distract yourself. Now, one way of distracting yourself could be through blaming. One way of distracting yourself could be like through judgment, okay? Or through anger, getting angry. When you're angry, when you're shouting at others, you're letting this energy out through that way. Again, it distracts you from pain. And there are all sorts of manipulating behaviors or behaviors which are distracting for pain that we may have become addicted to. And now for some people, this is more difficult to understand because the way the addiction works is much more subtle. Now, let me give you an example of one of these subtle behaviors. It could be for some people, even taking care of others could be a way to deal with pain, a way to distract themselves from pain. How? Let's say this person felt a kind of pain, like they were rejected during their childhood. Okay, they were rejected, or they were, let's say, someone was angry at them, someone shouted at them, right? And this was very painful. Okay, they did not want to deal with this pain of being attacked, this pain of being rejected. So what did they learn to do? Okay, if I start taking care of everyone, they will never be angry at me and I will never have to experience this pain again, right? If I am the nicest person I can be, they will never be angry at me, and so I will never deal with this pain. I will never feel this pain. So you can see how sometimes this can be very subtle. Even sometimes when we are trying to take care of others, when we're trying to be there for everyone, and usually the people who are dealing with pain like this, distracting themselves from like this, you see that they are so much addicted to taking care of others through this that they may not be familiar with their own preferences anymore. They don't know themselves because they always try to put others before themselves so that they would not get mad at them, they would not attack them, so they didn't need to deal with this pain. So as you can see, sometimes it can be very subtle. So in any way, the first side effect of distracting ourselves from the pain, as I said, is these kind of manipulating behaviors that we learn. Anger, judging, blaming, interrogating. It's also a whole list of things. And it's not that we all have all of them. No. Each of us may have a couple of them. Maybe for some person it's anger. Maybe for another person it's caretaking, right? It's not like we have all of them. No, each of us, based on our life experiences, we learned one of these patterns, right? And that's how still, after all these years, we're dealing with our issues. And you look at people and you can see this, right? For example, in a conflict, let's say between a husband and a wife, between two partners, as soon as there's a conflict, you can see what is the pattern they have learned to deal with a conflict. There may be a partner who immediately gets angry. There may be another partner who's learned that the best way is to remain silent and not say anything, just go away. There's all sorts of patterns and behaviors that we've learned to distract ourselves from pain. Now, there may be a partner who at some point they thought the best way not to deal with pain is to just accept with whatever everyone says, right? So they never speak up for their truth. They never speak up for themselves because they're like, okay, if I let everyone have their say, they'll never be mad at me. Okay, so you can see how this shows itself in many different ways based on the circumstances of our life. Another way that this whole thing about not dealing with pain and trying to avoid it shows itself in our life. So the first one was these manipulating behaviors or these behaviors that distract us from the pain. The second thing is addiction to people, right? Now, if a person in the same way that they can learn to resort to certain behaviors to distract themselves from pain, we can also learn to resort to people to avoid pain, right? For example, we may become super attached to people we are with. Like if we're not in a relationship, if they're even before, for example, a romantic relationship, maybe in the family, we need to have someone in the family that we're very sure they keep taking care of us, right? In other words, we can say that we want a person to give them the task of taking care of us, right? You make sure I don't feel bad. Now, it could, as we said, sometimes we was behaviors. Now in this one, it's people. So we become attached to people because if I'm next to you, you distract me from my pain, so I need you to feel good, right? You are, so the person in the relationships becomes the thing we use to not feel the pain inside. And so we become super attached to them because as soon as they go, we're left with our pain. So we become addicted to the person, attached. And so this is the way that this whole thing about distracting ourselves from the pain, avoiding pain, shows itself in our relationship with people. And of course, inshallah, later on, maybe we can talk about all of this because this has so many things we can learn from on how to improve our relationships. You know, instead of being dependent on the partner, we want to be codependent, right? And instead of two people giving the responsibility of their happiness to someone else, each person feels responsible for their own well-being. Because ultimately what happens in a situation like this, and this is very good also to understand, when we distract ourselves from the pain, when we avoid pain, what happens? Well, pain is at the core of our being, right? Pain is inside us. When you distract yourself from the pain, you're distracting yourself also from yourself, right? So in other words, you are abandoning yourself. Every time there was pain inside us and we didn't deal with it, we distracted ourselves from it, we were actually abandoning ourselves. So avoiding pain leads to self-abandonment, right? So we are basically ignoring ourselves. We're letting go of it. We're distracted from it. We become distanced from it. And inshallah, in the second part, we'll say what is the outcome of this when we abandon ourselves, right? We also, as a result of this, we no longer take responsibility for ourselves. That's one of the things we'll talk about in the second part, right? So when we're in a relationship, instead of me being responsible for my well-being, I say, you know what? This is me. You make sure I don't feel pain. So in other words, we give the responsibility of our well-being to our partner. If we, for example, allow this to come into our relationship, right? And you can see how difficult this is for another person to make sure we are feeling good. Now, this was with people. The third thing, the third side effect, so we said behavior, people, and the third thing is addiction to activities. In order to avoid pain, we may start eating. In order to avoid pain, we may start reading. Sometimes it could be even good stuff like reading. But if it's only to distract yourself from the pain, it becomes an addiction. And it could be all sorts of things. Sometimes it's internet. Sometimes it's watching series. Sometimes it's sleeping. For some people, it's exercising. Right? All sorts of things. It could be, for a lot of people, that's the whole concept of stress eating. You become stressed, you don't want to deal with it, distract yourself from it, you resort to eating, you resort to exercise. For some people, it becomes masturbation, pornography, or it could be even things which may seem healthy, but as long as there are means of distracting us from the pain, they have some side effects. Like a person may resort to shopping. Like it's not like shopping is bad, but if it's used as a means to distract us from the pain, it becomes unhealthy. Internet, TV series, any activity. Or even, things like foods and substances. Like it could be drugs, it could be sugar, it could be caffeine, right? It could be alcohol, anything that we go to in order to not feel the pain, at least for a while. Now, of course, with a person, as long as they are, right, it's a stronger thing, right? Whereas with an activity, of course, if a person then suddenly leaves, we become shattered. It's like we are, a person is holding us up, and as soon as they leave, we fall down. But with activities like eating, right, it's not like if you eat once, then for the whole week, you are going to be able to distract yourself from the pain. No, it only works for a very short time. So you have to keep doing it, right? So that's why these patterns may, at some point, even be an obstacle to our life, right? Anything. And that's how an addiction is formed, right? You have to keep doing it to distract yourself from pain. As you go towards it, you're abandoning yourself. And as you abandon yourself, your ability, your threshold for tolerating pain decreases. So you become more dependent on this activity or this substance. You need to do it more often, more often, more often, more often. And you see that, for example, there are people who have to masturbate 4, 5, 6 times during the day. Or eating, the person's overweight, deals with all sorts of issues, but they can't let go. Or reading, or exercise, or whatever. We have at some point, what is it called? Used in order to distract ourselves from the pain. So these are all the side effects of trying to avoid pain and distract ourselves. And of course, when we hear all of this, when we become aware that, oh, this is what I'm doing this, the first thing that comes to our mind should not be guilt, should not be sadness, should not be blaming ourselves, right? Again, all of this is doing the same thing. If you learned this about yourself, that, okay, in order to avoid pain, I started this behavior, like my anger or my withdrawal, or the idea that I'd never speak my truth, I always let others have their say, or maybe I became addicted to eating, or whatever. Now, once you learned this truth, it's going to be painful. And if in order to deal with this pain, you start blaming yourself or judging with yourself, you are doing the same thing all over again, right? So, right now, even if this is painful to accept, we have to deal with it. And we also have to be grateful. It is beautiful. It is very helpful to know, right? At least we know why we get angry. At least we know why we're getting attached to people. At least we know, depending on which one of this applies to us, right? I'm giving all sorts of examples so that each person takes the one it makes sense to them. At least I feel why I'm feeling lonely. At least I feel why am I so attached to this? Why do I, right? So just knowing it is beautiful. We have to be grateful for having this knowledge, because it is with this knowledge that then we can start to heal ourselves. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, we should not feel guilt. As I said, guilt is an attitude to not feel the pain, right? The reason we did this, the reason we became addicted, the reason we became like we learned to use people to feel good, the reason we learned to use people not to feel lonely, or the reason we become angry, all of this was that at some point, this is the best way we could think of to protect ourselves, right? So initially, we did this with a good intention, just to protect ourselves. We didn't know better. Right? So there wasn't any evil intention there. We didn't want to hurt ourselves. No. At one point, this was the best we could come up with in order to protect ourselves. But so that's why we shouldn't feel guilty about it. We shouldn't feel bad about it. But of course, now that we're older, now that we can take care of ourselves, if we can, why not find better ways, right? So this should be our attitude. Thank you so much. At some point, even if it's an addiction, even if it's attachment to people, even if it's anger, right? Don't be mad at your anger. Don't be mad at your overeating. Don't be mad at any of this. These were there to protect us at a point in our life where we could not protect ourselves any other way. If we could, we would have. Okay? So, we thank them, but now our task is to find ways to deal with it in a much safer way, in a way that does not have side effect. Now, let's see what is the other way of living. So this was a life in which we try to distract ourselves from pain. This was a life in which we try to avoid pain. Okay, if we don't want to live like that, what should we do? The first step in this second approach is to be willing to feel the pain. Be willing to feel the pain and also to take responsibility for taking care of ourselves. This is the first step. And of course, no one expects us to just by listening to a 30-minute talk to reach this first step. No, some of us may need to work on this first step for months, right? And of course, inshallah, at the end, I'll give you some instructions how to follow up, how to work on the first step, right? But the first step may take 1 day for someone because they've been ready for it. Maybe it takes 2 months, maybe it takes a year, maybe it takes years. But as long as you want, you can take your time as much as you want, but by the end of it, where you will reach is this, that, okay, now I don't want to distract myself from this pain. I want to be there, I want to feel it, and I want to be responsible for my own well-being. I'm not going to make another person responsible for me being good. I don't want to resort to, for example, food or an action to make myself feel good. I want to make myself feel good. I am responsible, so I am now willing to feel the pain and see what is the best way to deal with it. This is just step 1. Now, in order to make sense of this, let me give you an example, right? Why should I be responsible? Why should I feel the pain? Imagine if you had a child, or if you actually have a child, it would be much easier for you to understand what I'm saying. But imagine if you have a child, and every time the child comes to you and says like, "Mommy or Daddy, I'm anxious, I'm scared, I'm in pain," right? So your child comes with their pain, with their anxiety, or with their fear. Imagine if every time they did this, they came to say it, you were like, "Oh, this is too much. Right now, I can't deal with my child being anxious or scared. Let me distract myself. Let me go think about my work tomorrow. Let me go cook. Let me go watch TV." Right? How would your child feel? How would your child feel if every time he or she came to you to tell you she's scared or she's anxious, you ignored her and you did something to distract yourself? They would feel terrible. They would feel abandoned. Isn't that the case? Well, that is exactly what we are doing to ourselves. Every time we feel scared, every time we feel anxious, instead of listening to ourselves, what's going on? We distracted ourselves. Like, let's watch TV, right? Let's talk to someone. Let's go on Instagram. Let's do this. So we would never do this to our children. But we have learned, unfortunately, to do this to ourselves every day, right? So that's why I said the first step is to stop abandoning ourselves when we're in pain, but to be there for ourselves and tell ourselves that it's painful, but I'm going to stay here with you. I am not going to abandon myself. I'm going to stay here. And it's not easy to get to this level. It takes time. But once we get there, we've already taken the first step. And thinking about this example, I think it's very helpful, right? This example of you would never do that to your child. If every time your child comes, you just told it, "No, I don't want to deal with your pain right now." So if you feel pain, if you feel scared, look at this inner part of yourself like that. A part that needs attention. So don't abandon it. Don't distract yourself from it. Take responsibility for it and stay there with it, right? Now, the second part, so once we say, okay, I'm not going to abandon myself, I'm going to stay, I'm going to take the responsibility, I am willing to feel the pain. Now, the first step is very important, right? And in this step, in this step, what we try to do is it's two things we need to do at the same time. So, on the one hand, we try to invite to ourselves love and compassion, okay? We try to invite to ourselves, we try to ask God to give us love and compassion for ourselves, so that then we can attend the need of ourselves with love and compassion. Okay? And again, if we go back to the example of the child, it becomes clear why we need love and compassion to go on. Imagine your child comes and tells you she is scared. Now, because you've passed step 1, so you're not going to distract yourself. You're going to stay there. But let's say you stay there, but now you're angry. Like your child says, I'm scared. They're like, why are you scared? Don't be scared. How many times I tell you don't be scared? How many times I'll tell you like, don't worry, right? If you stay there, but you don't have a loving attitude, you can't do much, right? Imagine your child says, I'm scared. Why are you scared? That's stupid. Don't be scared. Like, or, well, that's not scary, right? That's not worrying. Grow up, right? If this is the attitude, well, you can't really help the child. So in the same way, for ourselves, if we want to feel our own pain, we have to do what? We have to make sure we do that with an attitude of love and compassion, right? And always have the example of the child in mind to know why it's so important for love and compassion to be there. Okay? And then, once love and compassion is there, another thing which we need to have is an intention to learn about the pain. An intention to understand. Why is that pain there? Why is that fear there? Why is that anxiety there? Right? Okay, I'm feeling pain, right? Why? I'm feeling anxious. Why? Right? This intention to learn is very important. And of course, the reason why I mentioned love and compassion first is that if you're not loving, if you're not compassionate, you're not even bothered to, be patient and learn. You just want to give a quick solution, which is the worst thing, even with your children. If your child comes and says, I'm anxious, and before asking why are you anxious? What made you feel that way? If the first thing we want to do is like, okay, go watch TV. Okay, do this, before knowing what has caused the anxiety, we're not going to be helping them, right? Because that issue will remain there. So the same is with ourselves. But in order to have the patience to sit with the pain, to try and understand it, it requires a lot of love. It's not easy because most of us, as soon as we see someone's anxious, our mind quickly goes, okay, the first priority is make them feel good, right? And that's not usually for them. It's because we can't deal with anxiety, not in ourselves, not even in others. So we're like, okay, I don't want to feel pain. I don't want to feel this person being anxious. Let's get rid of it. Let's make sure they're not anxious. So come on, stop being anxious. Go watch TV, right? But once you have love and compassion, it gives you the patience to say, okay, this pain is there. My child is anxious, or my inner child is anxious. My inner self is anxious, right? It's painful. I wish it wasn't there, right? I wish it wasn't there, but it's there. But I'm going to be loving and compassionate and wait without trying to distract myself from it, without trying to get rid of it. Sit and learn from it, right? So the intention to learn. And then a dialogue starts, right? A dialogue between us and this inner part that we have abandoned starts. Now, this dialogue, of course, can take all sorts of different shapes depending on each one of us. And for each one of us, based on, for example, fear, it could be one, anxiety, it could be one. But I'm going to give you one example just so that you can see how to take this next step, right? So you've already accepted, you've already are willing to feel the pain. You've tried to ask God, bring love and compassion to your heart, and you also have the intention to learn. So what is the next level? When this feeling of pain comes, let's say anxiety comes. This is one example. Let's say anxiety comes. Now you're like, okay, you try to start a dialogue. with the anxious part of yourself, right? Why are you feeling anxious? What is the source of your anxiety? And it's very beautiful. It may seem initially like, what? I'm talking to myself, I'm having a dialogue with myself, but try it. It really helps. And it may be difficult to have this in your mind, but write it on a piece of paper, right? First, ask the question on behalf of this part of you, which in step one decided to take responsibility. Ask the anxious part of yourself, why are you feeling anxious? And believe me, you'd be surprised that it will answer you, right? The anxious part of you will say something like, well, you're putting so much pressure on me, right? Like, it could be that, you know what, you tell me if I don't lose weight, no one will love me. You're telling me if I don't get these good grades, no one will love me. You're telling me if I don't get into that university, no one will love me. Do you know how much pressure this is? Right? And these are the things that if we look at our life, every one of us has it in one form or the other. Right? And for some people, it could be about their looks. If you don't look a certain way, no one will like you. So that we put this pressure on ourselves that you have to look a certain way. You have to be a certain way. And that's a lot of pressure. Or you have to get into this university. You have to get that degree. You have to have a certain house, right? So when you ask yourself the anxious part, why are you anxious? It will give you answers, right? Now we're just now I'm just mentioning one example. You go and find your own, right? So let's just go with this one example. You felt anxious, you stayed with it, and you tried to start a dialogue. You ask your anxious part, why are you anxious? And it told you, because you're putting so much pressure on me. Right? All these days that you told me, if I don't lose weight, no one will love me. Do you know what's the pressure of that? I want to feel loved. I don't want to be feeling rejected. So that's why I'm anxious, because there's so much pressure. You've told me if I fail, I won't be loved. Now, once you know this, again, you don't blame yourself. Once you know that you are, okay, let's say you are putting too much pressure on yourself, like you're telling yourself in some form, right? And we have to also know that a lot of the times it's not like we have literally said to ourselves that if you don't lose weight, no one will love you, or if you fail, no one will love you. These are so deep. These are very implicit, right? We may even be surprised that, yes, this is what we do. But if we look at the way we live, this is actually the way we're living, right? If we are so obsessed with certain thing, we're like, oh my God, that's actually what was the message of this to myself, right? So don't think it was, it needed to be said. No, a lot of the time it's just the way you lived. Implicitly, you send this message to yourself. But if I don't get married to that person, I'll never be loved. If I don't reach that level, I'll never be loved. All sorts of these implicit ways that we send a message. Okay, now we realize, let's say, for this person, that they're putting too much pressure on themselves. Again, there shouldn't be any blame. There shouldn't be, oh my God, how terrible I am. I'm evil. I'm putting pressure. No. Then you ask this part, okay? Why are you putting so much pressure on yourself? Why? Right? So we keep it a dialogue. First we said, why are you anxious? And the anxious part said, because you put pressure on me. And now we ask this one, why did you put pressure on yourself? Why? And you listen. And let's say in this example, the answer comes that because I thought if I make mistake, I won't be loved. I have to be perfect to be loved. Now you see at the root level of our anxiety was that at some point in our life, we had formed this false belief that in order to be loved, we should never make mistake. You see, through this dialogue, through staying with that anxiety, not distracting ourselves from it, we got to the core of it. Anxiety was because of pressure. Pressure was because we thought we have to be perfect in order to be loved, right? And of course, this is one example. You have to find your own source. But you now see how it works through this dialogue. And this false belief again, that I shouldn't make mistake to be loved, when you think about it, you see that this again is a form of controlling behavior, right? And the false belief is that I can control others. So maybe as a child, a person that we thought is responsible for taking care of us, for loving us, left us, or maybe in just one incident, they were angry, they shouted at us, maybe they abandoned us for a few hours, and then we thought, you know what? If I made a mistake and this person stopped loving me, now in order to make sure they love me, I have to be perfect. I will never make a mistake again. And we said this as a child. We may definitely not even remember this. Although it is possible that in the process, we may even remember the actual memory. But often we don't have this as explicit memory, as episodic memory. Usually this is implicit memory. This is just in the body. So at some point, a person that we thought they love us, they're taking care of us, maybe they told us, oh, and this is why they told parents that if a child is making a mistake and you want to correct the mistake, never make them feel that because of the mistake, you don't love them, right? Sometimes in order to get children to do something, we're like, if you, for example, don't eat, then auntie doesn't love you. And to the child, this is the most dangerous thing to hear. Oh, wow, they don't love me? Immediately they feel rejected. They're like, wow, with one mistake, I'm going to be rejected, right? And the child is 1 year old. It cannot deal with this pain. And this false belief that if I make a mistake, I will not be loved is formed, and then 30 years later, it's still with us and causes the anxiety. And of course, and the reason why I say it's a controlling behavior is because as a result of this false belief, we're like, okay, I should be perfect so everyone loves me. I want to control others. I want to get your love, right? I want to get your love so I'll be perfect so you have to love me, right? Now, we got to this stage. We stayed with the anxiety or with the pain. We asked our inner self, why are you anxious? It told us because of pressure. We asked ourselves, why do you put pressure on yourself? And it said, because I thought if I make a mistake, no one would love us. Now, the question is, okay, what do I do? Right? So at this stage, what you try to do is, it's beautiful actually. You ask God, right? You sit down, or maybe on your prayer mat, wherever you feel a better sense of connection with God, right? You thank God, okay, this is what's happening with me, okay? At some point, this is the belief I formed, and it's leading to my anxiety and all of that, okay? And so there's a part of me, this inner child, this inner self, feels anxious, feels if he makes a mistake or if she makes a mistake, she's not going to be loved. What do I do with this? What do I tell myself? And if I tell you that, you would be surprised that the answer will come to you. You won't believe me unless you go and try it for yourself. The answer will come to you, right? Especially, this is very important, if initially you did ask God to bring that love and compassion in your heart. Why was that love and compassion so important? Because, see, the way God's look at us is through love and compassion. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Right? The way God looks at us is with so much love, with so much compassion. So in this stage, where we realize how we have been treating ourselves and how it has led to so much pain and anxiety, and we want to learn the correct way of dealing with ourselves, we have to make sure we are in sync with God so that God's answer can come to our heart. So if God looks at me with love and compassion, which we know, if, for example, Dr. Haydarpur has spoken so many times about this, the amount of times Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim God says in the Quran, right? God is merciful, compassionate. That's how God introduces himself. So when we also look at ourselves through love and compassion, then God's way of looking at us comes to our heart, is revealed to our heart, and we learn what is the next step. Let's say in this example, right? This example that we said a person was anxious because of putting too much pressure on themselves, because they believed that if they fail or if they make one mistake, no one will love them. Once they sit down and ask God, then it will be revealed to them that no, you are lovable even if you make mistakes. Because we're asking God very sincerely, how should I treat myself? I have this false belief that if I make mistake, I'm not worthy of love, right? And it was formed when I was a kid. So what should I do? And this answer would be revealed to you. Believe me, it will be. Because at the core of who we are connected to God. And God will reveal the answer to your heart that yes, the way to know is that you should know. You are lovable no matter how many times you make a mistake. And now from this step onward, it becomes so beautiful for two reasons. Not only you are healing yourself, not only you are dealing with your anxiety at its root level, but you are also creating a very beautiful relationship between you and God through your deepest part of yourself. And you will see that things would be revealed to you, to your own very heart. And you see that some of the verses of the Quran that maybe you read millions of times, thousands of times, and they were always words that never change your life, you see some of them in smaller dosages being revealed to your heart. But once a verse of Quran is revealed to your heart, it's not the same as you reading it on a page. It changes your life. Like what? Like imagine how many of us throughout our lives, we told ourselves that we have to be a certain way to be loved. Or we should never make this mistake. We should have that. We shouldn't be like this. We should lose weight. We should be there to feel loved. And the core belief of this was that I am not worthy of love if I fail. But then suddenly God reveals to your heart that you are always loved and worthy of love no matter what. So it really, and believe me, sometimes it can be so powerful, you'll just be overwhelmed. The God love will send to your heart at this stage is so overwhelming. Believe me, some people say we just couldn't take it. Like, wow, God loves me this much. And this is why I say it's very different than reading it, because we had all of this in the Quran. God said, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا. Right? Oh, my people who made so many mistakes. Never be desperate in my hope and love. Come back. I love all of you. These were in the Quran. But when we read them, it didn't do anything to us. But once you go through these stages, this love of the God, which was always in the Quran, no matter what you do, God says, I will love you. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. You are so important. Right? All of these verses that we read in the Quran didn't mean much. The reality of it comes to your heart and you would be so overwhelmed with God's love that you slowly start to learn and let go of that false belief that if I make mistakes, I won't be loved. And at this stage, you ask yourself, okay, what should I be doing? What is the loving action now that I need to take? Now, for some issues, maybe just getting the answer would help. But for some other issues, there may be actions that we need to take. If, for example, before this, we felt like we won't be loved, or like we're not worthy of love, or that on our own we're not good enough, we always need to be with others, and as a result of this, let's say we learned that, okay, I should never say how I feel, because if I say how I feel, they would be mad at me, they would leave me, right? Let's say this is how a person learned to deal with their pain. If this is what they did, now at this stage, they should take loving actions to heal this. Once the core issue is they realize what was the core of this, they realize they should love themselves, they say, okay, I have to speak my truth, right? If, for example, in order to avoid pain, I was eating a certain way which was harming me, now I have to take care of myself, right? So the next stage would be, once you ask God to show you how to now take care of yourself, then the next stage is you go and do that, right? Now, once God may reveal to you that you are loved, even though you may make mistakes. Now, another time, God may reveal to you that, you know what? You should take care of yourself in this area. And then the next stage would be you go and do that. But now it's so much easier to do it because you have now this firm conviction in the deepest levels of your heart of your own worth, right? And so you go and do that, and you make sure that you carry on with it. So this was, in a nutshell, our discussion. Pain comes, we try to avoid ourselves, distracted, led to all sorts of addictions, behaviors, manipulating behaviors, angers, blaming, addiction to people, addiction to substances, addiction to eating, etc. And we said, okay, if I don't want to do that, if I want to feel the pain, we said the first step was be willing to stay with the pain. Like a child, if your child comes with a pain to you, you don't tell them to get away. Say, no, you stay with them. Second thing was, if a child comes to you and says they're scared, you have to deal with it with love and compassion, as well as the intention to learn. So if the child comes and says, I'm anxious, you don't say, okay, go and watch a TV. No, why are you anxious? Intention to learn. Why are you anxious? We did the same thing with ourselves, right? Why am I anxious? Why am I scared? And then a dialogue starts where the anxious parts of us reveals to us why it's anxious. Maybe it says you're putting too much pressure on me. So you ask yourself, why am I putting too much pressure? And it says, because I thought if I make mistake, I won't be loved. And then you ask yourself, and then you go to your heart and you ask God to reveal to you, God, this is what I'm doing. What is the way for me to deal with this part of myself that is hurt, that feels abandoned? And God will reveal to your heart. The loving thing to do would be this, or the loving thing would be to speak up for yourself, to do this, to take care of yourself too. And then you go and take that, right? So this was in a nutshell what happened. And as we go on with these stages, certain things at a very fundamental level will be healed for us. Certain things which are the source of all sorts of issues in relationships, in many things. You know, at the core of our problems, one of the main problems we have is this issue of our self-worth. And let's get entangled with all sorts of other problems. Because if I don't feel like I'm loved as I am, if I don't feel like I'm worthy, then I need to look for love elsewhere, right? And this leads to all sorts of things. I need to seek for validity, I need to seek for approval. I need to look for love other places, right? Something which was meant to come naturally from within, my self-worth, my love, my connection to myself. But because I got abandoned from myself, I lost all of this. I lost my inner sense of self-worth, my love, my connection. So I go around looking for this in other places or for ways to distract myself from this. But I am walking on very dangerous grounds. Imagine if a person doesn't feel love from inside, and and it's very difficult to live without self-worth or without love. It's very difficult. And if it doesn't come from within, you need it from outside. So this is why a partner may become so fundamental for my well-being. Why? Because I don't have love inside, and they're giving me love, so they become so important. And this leads to all sorts of wrong patterns in the behavior. A person may say, you know what, I will have to do whatever I can do to please this person because I need love. Or another person says, I have to control them in all sorts of ways so they don't leave me, right? All sorts of problems arise just because we came to this relationship to seek for something which was always within us, because we abandoned ourselves, we didn't have access to it, okay? So I think it's good to stop at this stage, and we can have some question and answers, okay?